Your brother is the new CEO. 5 words that erased 12 years of my life. I can still see my father's smile as he delivered the news. Not apologetic, not even sympathetic. Satisfied. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The board meeting minutes still litter my desk. The words succession planning and family legacy highlighted in his precise handwriting. Beside them sits the press release draft announcing my younger brother as Rivercrest Industries' new CEO. A position I built, a throne I constructed, a legacy he'll inherit with a fraction of the sacrifice. The champagne in my glass had gone, flat an hour ago, but no one at the executive dinner seemed to notice I'd stopped drinking. The private dining room at Elysian Fields buzzed with conversation and expensive perfume as 20 of Rivercrest's top executives and board members celebrated our 3rd consecutive year of record growth. $50 million in revenue, a number that would have seemed impossible when I joined my father's struggling manufacturing company fresh out of business school. A toast! My father's voice cut through the chatter as he rose from his seat at the head of the long mahogany table. At 68, Vincent Parker remained imposing, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his bespoke suit without a wrinkle. He commanded attention without effort, a skill I'd spent years trying to emulate. To Rivercrest Industries' most profitable year to date. He raised his glass, his signet ring catching the light. And to family, the foundation upon which all great empires are built. The room erupted in enthusiastic agreement. I smiled automatically, years of corporate politics making the expression second nature even as unease settled in my stomach. Something about my father's tone, the way his eyes skipped over me to land on my brother Neil across the table. Neil, who had joined the company just 4 years ago after bouncing between careers, law school dropout, failed restaurateur, half-hearted marketing executive at a friend's startup. Neil, who now raised his glass with a smile that seemed more satisfied than the occasion warranted. And now, my father continued, setting his champagne flute down with precision, I have an announcement that I've been eagerly waiting to share with our Rivercrest family. The room quieted. Beside me, Diane Wu, our CFO and my most trusted colleague, shifted slightly. She knew something. The realization sent a chill through me. As some of you know, I've been contemplating the future of our leadership structure for some time now. At my age, succession planning isn't just prudent. It's necessary. My pulse quickened. We'd discussed this, of course. Subtle conversations over the past 2 years that always ended with reassurances about my position, my contributions, my future. I'd even drafted preliminary transition plans, carefully timed proposals for my ascension to CEO while Dad stepped into an emeritus role. Effective next quarter, I'll be stepping back from day-to-day operations to serve as chairman of the board. His announcement was met with murmurs of surprise, quickly hushed as he raised his hand. And I'm pleased to announce that the board has unanimously approved our new chief executive officer. His eyes found mine, and for a moment, relief flooded through me. This was it. The culmination of 12 years rebuilding what had once been a failing regional supplier into an international force. The validation of countless missed weekends, postponed vacations, and relationships sacrificed on the altar of ambition. Neil Parker will be taking the reins as CEO, bringing fresh perspectives and innovative thinking to lead Rivercrest into its next chapter. The room spun slightly. Polite applause filled my ears as if from a great distance. Neil stood, accepting congratulatory handshakes with practiced humility that hadn't existed 6 months ago. Had this been planned that long? Longer? Samantha, of course, my father added almost as an afterthought, will continue her excellent work as Chief Operating Officer, supporting Neil's vision for our future. Supporting Neil's vision. The words settled like lead in my stomach. Diane's hand found my knee under the table, a silent reminder to maintain composure. I straightened my spine, forced my face into what I hoped resembled pleasant surprise, rather than stunned betrayal, and raised my glass mechanically. "Congratulations, Neil," I managed, the words tasting like ash. "No one more deserving." A lie so profound it should have shattered my champagne flute. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of small talk and strategic exits to the restroom where I could breathe without the weight of watchful eyes. I messaged Diane. "Did you know?" Her response came immediately. "Not until yesterday. Sworn to secrecy." "I'm so sorry." At least someone was. By the time dinner concluded, I'd constructed a mask of professional acceptance. I congratulated board members on their foresight, thanked my father for his leadership, and even managed to hug Neil without visibly shuddering. Performance had always been part of the corporate game. I just hadn't expected to be acting in a tragedy of my own making. My father caught my elbow as guests began filtering out to waiting cars. "A word, Samantha. Not a request. Never a request with Vincent Parker." We stepped into an adjoining private room where coffee service had been arranged but remained untouched. The door clicked shut behind us with finality. "You're disappointed." Again, not a question. "I'm surprised," I corrected carefully, maintaining the diplomatic language that had served me through countless negotiations. "The succession timeline is certainly accelerated from our previous discussions." My father's laugh was short, humorless. "Always so measured, so controlled. That's part of the problem, you know. I wasn't aware there was a problem with my performance." My voice remained steady despite the anger building beneath my sternum. "Our growth metrics suggest quite the opposite. Growth isn't everything, Samantha. Rivercrest needs a leader who inspires, who connects. Someone who understands that business is built on relationships, not just spreadsheets and efficiency protocols." Relationships. The word hung between us. Like the family relationship that apparently dictated this decision? A flash of irritation crossed his face. "This isn't about nepotism, if that's what you're implying. The board evaluated both candidates extensively." Both candidates. So there had been a selection process, one I hadn't even known I was participating in. When? The question escaped before I could package it into something more diplomatic. "The assessment has been ongoing for nearly a year." He straightened his already impeccable tie. "Neil has shown remarkable leadership potential, particularly in developing client relationships and presenting our vision to stakeholders." Of course he had. While I'd been restructuring supply chains during the pandemic, negotiating with international vendors during material shortages, and implementing the automation systems that had cut our production costs by 22%, Neil had been taking clients to golf courses and speaking at industry panels that I'd been too busy to attend. "Neil has the charisma this company needs moving forward," my father continued, oblivious to or simply uninterested in my silence. "You've built an impressive operational foundation, and your continued contribution as COO is valued. You and Neil will make an excellent team." "Team," I echoed, the word hollow. "With him as my superior." "With him as CEO, yes." My father's patience was clearly waning. "This is business, Samantha, not a childhood competition. The board has made its decision." The board? His board? Filled with his golf partners, former classmates, and family friends. I wanted to scream, to list my accomplishments, to demand recognition for transforming his failing company into the juggernaut it had become. But years of corporate training had taught me the futility of emotional displays. "I see." I smoothed my already smooth skirt. "And when did Neil become aware of this assessment process?" Something shifted in my father's expression. Discomfort? Perhaps, or the closest approximation Vincent Parker could manage. Neil has been working with an executive coach for the past 10 months in preparation for this transition. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. 10 months. While I'd been pulling all-nighters to close our largest acquisition to date, my brother had been groomed for my position. The position I'd been tacitly promised for years. That was efficient planning. I managed the understatement of my professional career. Samantha. My father's tone softened marginally, the closest he ever came to affection. This doesn't diminish your contributions. Your operational expertise is invaluable to Rivercrest. But a CEO needs certain qualities that are innate rather than earned, I supplied. Chromosomally determined, perhaps? His expression hardened. That's beneath you. Gender had nothing to do with this decision. Of course not. That would be illegal. My smile felt brittle. Just as I'm sure age discrimination wasn't a factor, despite Neil's convenient youth providing you with a much longer runway before the next succession crisis. This conversation is becoming unproductive. He checked his watch, a dismissal so familiar from my childhood it almost made me laugh. Some patterns never changed. Sleep on it. You'll see this is for the best. The transition announcement goes public next week. I expect your full support. Full support. For the brother who'd joined the company as a vice president despite zero relevant experience, whose salary had matched mine within 2 years despite my decade-long head start, who now would become my boss despite building exactly none of what he was about to inherit. Absolutely, I lied again, extending my hand formally. You have my full professional support. My father looked at my outstretched hand with momentary confusion before taking it. Even in this, he'd expected something different, perhaps dutiful acceptance, or even gratitude for keeping me in the executive suite at all. Good. He nodded, already mentally moving to his next task. The press release drafts are with communications. Review them tomorrow, would you? Your perspective would be helpful. My perspective, on the announcement of my own supersession. Of course. I gathered my purse and wrap, anxious now to escape before my carefully constructed composure cracked. Good night, Dad. The word dad, rather than father, was deliberate. A small, petty reminder of the personal betrayal layered beneath the professional one. He nodded absently, already checking messages on his phone. I made it to my car before the first tear fell. Hot and unwelcome on my cheek. I wiped it away ruthlessly. Tears wouldn't change the board's decision. Tears wouldn't erase a year of secret evaluations and preparations. Tears wouldn't undo decades of watching my father choose my brother, despite every metric suggesting he should choose differently. But as I drove away from Elysian Fields, the restaurant's pretentious name suddenly ironic. Something else replaced the tears. Something colder, clearer, and infinitely more dangerous than sadness. I pulled into the empty Rivercrest parking lot, just after midnight, using my executive access card to enter the darkened building. My office looked different in the dim emergency lighting, less like a place of triumph and more like a crime scene. Years of sacrifice reduced to leather furniture and deal tombstones. The Employee of the Year trophy gleamed dully on its shelf. Corporate Consolation Prize. I sat at my desk and opened my laptop, navigating to a folder labeled Contingency, Planning. Inside were documents I'd prepared 6 months ago when the first whispers of my brother's abnormally rapid advancement had reached me. Not detailed enough to be actionable yet. I wasn't that paranoid, but framework enough for what needed to happen next. I hadn't built Rivercrest into a $50 million company by being unprepared. I sent a single text message to Diane. Breakfast tomorrow, 7 a.m., the usual place. It's time for Plan B. Her response came seconds later. I'll bring the proposals and the bourbon. I smiled for the first time since the announcement. It wasn't the same smile I'd worn throughout dinner, Placid, professional, practiced. This smile had edges. This smile had intent. If Vincent Parker thought the succession announcement was the end of this story, he'd vastly underestimated the daughter he'd just betrayed. I hadn't spent 12 years building an empire just to hand it over and walk away empty-handed. My brother might be getting the title, but I'd be leaving with so much more. The morning after the announcement dawned gray and drizzling, matching my mood perfectly. I arrived at Rivercrest headquarters at 5:30 a.m., an hour earlier than my usual. Early start, needing the empty hallways and silence before the inevitable whispers began. My office looked exactly as I'd left it the night before, yet somehow fundamentally changed. The same awards lined the walls, the same ergonomic chair waited behind the same custom desk I'd selected when we renovated the executive floor 3. Years ago. But now everything felt temporary, as if the room itself recognized its occupant had been demoted before actually moving. I ran my hand along the sleek conference table where I'd held countless strategy sessions, wondering how many of those strategies had included my own obsolescence. My assistant Raj arrived at 6:15, coffee in hand and blissfully unaware of last night's announcement. His cheerful, "Morning, boss," would likely be one of the last genuine ones I'd receive. By afternoon, the news would spread through the company. Like wildfire, and boss would take on a tinge of irony or worse, pity. The Tokyo distributor called, he said, setting down my coffee. They're still pushing back on the new quality control standards. Want me to set up a call? Yes, but push it to next week. I took a grateful sip of the perfectly prepared dark roast. And move my 10 a.m. with production to tomorrow. I need to work on something else this morning. Sure thing. Everything? Okay? His brow furrowed slightly. Raj had been with me for 5 years, long enough to detect when something was off. Just some new developments, I replied vaguely. You'll hear about it in the all-hands later today. His expression shifted to concern, but he nodded professionally. Got it. I'll clear your morning. I felt a pang of guilt. Raj had hitched his career wagon to my star. Would Neil keep him on, or would he bring in his own people? Another collateral damage in this corporate coup. At 6:45, I left for my breakfast meeting with Diane, navigating the slowly awakening city. Streets to our usual spot. A small, upscale cafe tucked away from the financial district where Rivercrest executives rarely ventured. Diane was already there, occupying our regular corner table with 2 steaming mugs and a distinctive folder with Harrington and Myers' discreet law firm logo embossed on its cover. You look like hell, she greeted me, pushing a mug in my direction. Thank you for that astute observation. I settled into the chair across from her, grateful for her directness. Did you bring it? She patted the folder. All here, but we should order first. You'd essentially become their vendor instead of their employee. The server refilled our coffee cups. We sat in silence until he moved away again. There's a 4th option, Diane said finally. I'm listening. Take the software. Take Key. Clients, take me and other loyalists and start fresh. Streamlined. No family baggage. No board of your father's golfing buddies. My pulse quickened. A competitor. Not just a competitor. Diane's eyes gleamed with unexpected intensity. A rival that could eclipse Rivercrest within 3 years. You built that company once. You could build another faster, better, without Vincent Parker's limitations. The idea was simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating. 12 years of my life had gone into Rivercrest, but what did I really have to show for it? A COO title that my father clearly considered adequate compensation for a daughter's ambition. Neil would never recover, I mused, stirring my coffee. Dad either. They made their choice. Diane's voice was gentle but firm. Now you get to make yours. I looked out the window at the rain-slicked streets, at business people hurrying. to their offices, to their routines, to lives where perhaps families didn't weaponize corporate succession planning. "I need to think," I said finally. "Really think, not just react." "Of course." Diane closed the folder. "But think quickly. Once the announcement goes public next week, options narrow. Right now, we have the advantage of surprise." She checked her watch. "We should head back separately. I have the quarterly projections meeting at 8:30. Go ahead. I'll settle the bill." After she left, I remained at the table, coffee cooling untouched before me. Through the window, I watched a young woman rushing through the rain, portfolio clutched protectively against her chest, ambition practically radiating from her determined stride. I had been her once, before Rivercrest consumed my 20s and early 30s, before I became the dutiful daughter who built her father's legacy instead of her own. My phone vibrated with a text from Neil. "Breakfast tomorrow to discuss transition? My treat." My brother's sudden interest in my input was as transparent as it was insulting. He needed my operational knowledge, my client relationships, my team's loyalty, all the things I had painstakingly built that he couldn't replicate with charisma, alone. I left the text unanswered and paid the bill, stepping out into the drizzling rain without bothering to open my umbrella. Some discomforts were clarifying. By the time I reached my car, I had made my decision. The Rivercrest boardroom was eerily quiet when I entered for the morning executive meeting. Conversations stopped mid-sentence, replaced by awkward smiles and too bright greetings. News travels fast in corporate corridors. Samantha, Gerald Whitfield, VP of Sales, approached with the careful demeanor of someone approaching a wounded animal. "Just heard the big announcement. Quite the surprise." "For some of us more than others," I replied evenly, arranging my materials at my usual seat. Not at the head of the table, that had always been my father's position, but at his right hand. I wondered idly where Neil would sit today. Would he usurp my spot already, or maintain the pretense of the current hierarchy until the public announcement? My question was answered moments later when Neil strode in, looking uncharacteristically professional in a tailored suit I'd never seen before. He hesitated briefly before taking the seat directly across from me, a diplomatic choice that still felt like a victory lap. "Morning, team." He nodded to the gathered executives, several of whom offered congratulations he accepted with practiced humility. The performance made my stomach turn. 4 years ago, Neil had joined Rivercrest knowing nothing about manufacturing, operations, or our industry. I still remembered his first day. "You could at least pretend to be happy for me," Neil had said, lounging in one of my office chairs while I reviewed production reports. At 32, my brother had the relaxed confidence of someone who'd never faced real consequences for failure. "I am happy for you," I'd replied without looking up. "I'm just busy running a company." "Dad's company," he'd corrected with a smirk. "And now I'm part of it too. Vice President of Strategic Development. Has a nice ring, doesn't it?" I'd finally met his gaze. "And what exactly will you be developing strategically?" "That's the beauty of it." He'd stretched, completely at ease. "It's open-ended. Dad wants me to explore opportunities, build relationships, bring fresh thinking to the table. A job without metrics, deliverables, or specific responsibilities. A title without substance." "Just stay out of operations," I'd told him, returning to my reports. "We're implementing the new ERP system next quarter, and I don't need complications." Always so serious, Sam. He'd stood to leave, straightening the designer tie that cost more than most factory workers made in a week. "That's why Dad asked me to join. Says the company needs some personality at the top." I should have recognized the warning signs then. The boardroom filled as the remaining executives arrived. My father entered last, commanding immediate attention. He surveyed the room with satisfaction before taking his seat. "I assume by now everyone has heard our exciting news," he began without preamble. Neil's appointment as CEO represents an important evolution for Rivercrest as we look toward the future. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. I kept my expression neutral, aware of watchful eyes gauging my reaction. We'll discuss transition details and make the formal announcement next week, my father continued. For now, let's proceed with regular business. Samantha, the quarterly operations review? I stood and presented the numbers methodically. Production, efficiencies, supply chain optimizations, labor cost reductions. The same impressive metrics I'd delivered quarter after quarter, building Rivercrest's reputation for operational excellence. The foundation upon which my brother would now stand and claim the view. Through my presentation, I caught occasional glances between my father and Neil, small nods of approval, private smiles of satisfaction. A language of shared understanding from which I had always been excluded. It hadn't always been this way. There was a time when my father's approval had been attainable, when his pride in my accomplishments had seemed genuine. I don't understand why you want to waste your MBA on this, my mother had said 12 years ago, gesturing around our family living room where my father had spread financial statements across every surface. Rivercrest is barely staying afloat. You could have your pick of consulting offers. At 25, fresh out of business school, I'd been determined to prove my worth in the most challenging environment I could find. A failing family business. It's not a waste, I'd insisted. Dad needs help, and I understand manufacturing systems. This is what I trained for. Your father has never taken advice from anyone, my mother had warned, her voice tinged with the weariness of their recent separation. Especially not from women. But she'd been wrong, at least initially. My father had been desperate enough to listen when I'd outlined my plans for modernizing Rivercrest's outdated production facilities. He'd reluctantly approved my proposal to refinance, reinvest, and restructure, though not without making me prove each concept twice over. If this fails, he'd warned, we lose everything. The Parker name means something in this industry. It will mean even more when we're leading the market, I'd promised. For 3 years, I'd worked 18-hour days, sleeping on a cot in my office during implementation crises, sacrificing friendships and relationships for the sake of the company. My father had watched with growing respect as orders increased, costs decreased, and Rivercrest gradually climbed from regional obscurity to industry recognition. You remind me of myself at your age, he'd told me on the day we'd celebrated our first $1 million month. Unstoppable. It had been the highest praise he could offer, and I'd basked in it, believing I'd finally broken through the invisible barrier that had always existed between us. Believing I'd finally proven I was more than just his daughter. I was his successor. Excellent numbers as always, Samantha. My father's voice pulled me back to the present as I concluded my presentation. Neil, perhaps you'd like to share some thoughts on our strategic direction given these results. And just like that, my detailed operational review became a platform for my brother's vague visionary statements about synergies and holistic market approaches that somehow earned thoughtful nods from the same executives who scrutinized my every forecast decimal point. The meeting continued with routine updates from other departments. I contributed where necessary, but otherwise remained silent, watching dynamics I'd never fully noticed before. How my father deferred to Neil's opinions, how certain executives, particularly those closest to retirement, aligned their comments. With Neil's perspectives, how easily the room accepted this new reality. As the meeting concluded, my father announced, Neil and I have calls with our top 3 clients this afternoon to share our transition news personally. Samantha, we'd like you to join the Peterson Global call at 2. They've always appreciated your attention to their operational requirements. Translation. Peterson Global, our largest client, might be alarmed by the leadership change, and they needed me to reassure them that service wouldn't suffer. I was being trotted out as the reliable workhorse while Neil was presented as the visionary new leader. Actually, I said, gathering my materials, I have a conflict at 2. The automation system review with the development team can't be rescheduled. A small lie. The review could absolutely be rescheduled, but I needed that meeting for what I was planning next. My father frowned. This is more important than a routine system review. Is it? I met his gaze directly. The automation system that increased our production capacity by 40% while reducing costs by 22% seems pretty important to Peterson Global's delivery schedule. A flash of annoyance crossed his face at the public challenge. Fine. Neil and I will handle it. As the room emptied, Neil approached, his expression conciliatory. About that breakfast to discuss transition. Can't do it, I interrupted. Schedule's packed this week. Sam, don't be difficult. His voice lowered. This is happening whether you like it or not. Wouldn't it be better to work together? I studied my brother, the easy charm, the practiced sincerity. Had he always been this transparent, or had I only recently developed the ability to see through him? You know what's interesting, Neil? I kept my voice light, conversational. In 4 years, you've never once asked me how the automation system actually works. Not once, yet it's the cornerstone of Rivercrest's competitive advantage. Confusion flickered across his face. That's your domain. Operations. Yes, I smiled thinly. My domain. I left him standing there, perplexed by a conversation whose significance he couldn't yet grasp. In my office, I closed the door and texted Diane. I've decided. Option 4. How quickly can we move? Her response was immediate. Already working. On it. Meeting with Harrington and Myers at noon. Need anything else? I glanced through my office window to where my father and Neil stood in the hallway, heads bent together in conversation. The two Parker men, planning a future built on foundations they hadn't laid, secured by systems they didn't understand, dependent on loyalty they hadn't earned. Yes, I typed. Find out who owns the client relationship contracts. Specifically, if they're with Rivercrest Corporate or with the named executive contacts. The question might seem technical, even mundane, but in business, details determine destinies. And I had always excelled at details. The development team's conference room was tucked away on the 3rd floor, deliberately isolated from the executive. Suites. I'd designed it that way years ago, a dedicated space where innovation could happen without constant oversight or interruption. Today, that separation would serve a different purpose. 5 people waited inside. Eliza Mercer, our lead software architect, Raj, my assistant, Diane, and 2 developers I'd personally recruited from MIT 3 years earlier. All people I trusted. All people who had thrived under my leadership. Close the door, I instructed Raj as I entered, and engage privacy mode. He tapped the control panel, turning the glass walls opaque and activating the sound-dampening system I'd insisted on installing, another detail my father had considered excessive, but had ultimately approved to keep me happy. Thank you all. For coming on short notice, I began, taking a seat at the head of the table. What I'm about to discuss requires absolute confidentiality. They exchanged glances but nodded. These were people accustomed to handling proprietary information, people who understood the value of discretion in business. By now, you've likely heard that Neil will be announced as CEO next week. Expressions ranged from surprise to confusion to poorly concealed indignation. Eliza, never one to hide her opinions, spoke first. That's unexpected, and frankly, concerning for our division. I appreciated her directness. Concerning how? She shifted uncomfortably. Neil has repeatedly questioned the resources allocated to system development. Last month, he suggested our team was bloated and that we should consider outsourcing future development to cut costs. This was news to me. When was this? During the budget review you missed for the Tokyo trip, Diane supplied. I countered that the ROI on in-house development has been proven repeatedly, but Neil seemed unconvinced. Pieces clicked into place. My brother wasn't just aiming for my job, he was already working to dismantle parts of my legacy. That brings me to why we're here, I said, opening my laptop. The proprietary automation system, officially known as Rivercrest OS but internally called Heisman, represents the single most valuable intellectual property this company possesses. I brought up the original development contracts on the EE screen. Eliza, can you explain to everyone how the ownership of this system is structured? Eliza straightened. As lead architect, she'd been present for every legal discussion surrounding the system's development. The core architecture and implementation rights are personally held by Samantha, she explained, with Rivercrest holding an enterprise license for usage. This arrangement was established to protect the system if Rivercrest was ever acquired, ensuring the technology couldn't be exploited by a parent company without proper compensation. That was the official reason, I confirmed. But there was another purpose that seemed merely theoretical at the time. I pulled up another document, the license agreement with its carefully worded termination clauses. If leadership changes occur without consent of the intellectual property holder, I continued, highlighting the relevant section, the license can be revoked with 30 days' notice. Silence fell over the room as implications became clear. Raj was the first to break it. You're leaving Rivercrest, he stated flatly. Not a question. I'm considering my options, I answered carefully. And I need to understand exactly where everyone in this room stands before making final decisions. Diane took over smoothly. The automation system isn't the only valuable asset at stake. Client relationships, vendor contracts, and institutional knowledge are equally important. You're planning a competitor, Eliza said, realization dawning in her eyes. A rival to Rivercrest. I neither confirmed nor denied, instead watching their reactions carefully. This moment would determine everything that followed. These people weren't just employees. They were potential co-founders of whatever came next. Or potential whistleblowers who could derail everything. Before anyone responds, I said, I want to be absolutely clear. I'm not asking anyone to break contracts, violate non-competes, or do anything legally questionable. I'm simply assessing possibilities. Non-competes are state-specific and often unenforceable, one of the MIT developers, Ben, offered unexpectedly. When we all turned to him, he shrugged. My brother's a contract attorney. We've discussed this theoretically. Theoretically, Diane echoed with the ghost of a smile. What exactly are you proposing? Raj asked, ever practical. I took a deep breath. Until this moment, I could have backed away, could have convinced myself to accept the COO position under Neil, could have found ways to rationalize staying. But articulating the plan aloud would cross a line from which there would be no return. I'm proposing we start fresh, I said finally. A new company focused on advanced manufacturing automation. Not just using the system, but licensing it to others. We'd leverage our expertise, our relationships, and yes, the proprietary technology I developed. And our first client would be Rivercrest, Eliza deduced, who would suddenly need to license back their own operational backbone. If they choose to, I corrected. They could also attempt to replace it, though that would take years and millions in development costs. The room fell silent again as each person calculated risks and rewards, loyalty versus self-preservation. I didn't push. This decision couldn't be coerced. It had to be freely given. Surprisingly, it was Raj who broke the silence. I've updated your resume 4 times in 6 years, he said. Each time you received offers with significant increases in compensation and authority. Each time you stayed out of loyalty to the company your grandfather started, that your father grew, that you were presumably being groomed to lead. He met my gaze directly. That loyalty was never reciprocated. I'm in. the technical challenges of scaling the system for multiple clients would be significant, Eliza mused, but her eyes showed excitement rather than hesitation. We'd need to rebuild certain components from the ground up. It would be fascinating work. To be clear, Diane interjected, this would be a clean break. New company, new offices, new everything. We'd operate entirely above board, with proper legal separation and transparent client acquisition. But with significant competitive advantage, Ben added, exchanging glances with his fellow developer. Count us in too. The system's our baby, as much as anyone's. I felt something shift inside me, relief mixed with resolve. Until this moment, option 4 had been theoretical, a revenge fantasy born from betrayal. Now, with these people willing to follow me, it became real, possible, perhaps even inevitable. If we do this, I said, there's no halfway. Vincent Parker doesn't lose gracefully, and he certainly doesn't forgive perceived disloyalty. I looked at each of them in turn. He'll make it personal. He'll make it difficult. He'll use every resource at his disposal to oppose us. With respect, Eliza said, leaning forward, your father has a blind spot. He sees the world in terms of connections, handshakes, and country club memberships. He doesn't truly understand the technology that makes his company run. Neil even less so, Raj added. They understand profit, Diane countered, and they'll understand the threat when they see it. I nodded, acknowledging both perspectives. Which is why timing is crucial. If we move precisely, comprehensively, and legally irreproachably. I pulled up a blank document. Let's map this out step by step. Phase 1 needs to be completed before the CEO announcement goes public. As we began planning, I felt the weight of the past 12 years, the missed vacations, canceled dates, sacrificed personal milestones, shift from burden to fuel. Every concession I'd made for Rivercrest, every compromise for family harmony, every silent acceptance of my father's favoritism now served a new purpose. They had all been preparing me for this moment of decision, this point of no return. First, I dictated as Diane took notes, we established the new corporate entity immediately. Harrington and Myers can file today with shelf articles of incorporation they have ready. Name? Diane asked, pen poised. I paused, considering. The name would send a message, both to the market and to my father. It needed to be professional, yet pointed. Phoenix Automation Systems, I decided. Rising from ashes seemed appropriately symbolic. Next, we need to formally document the intellectual property transfer from me personally to the new entity, with appropriate compensation. Stock? Diane suggested. Primarily, yes, but with some cash component from initial investment. I'd been saving aggressively for years, living well below my means despite my considerable salary. Another detail my family had never fully appreciated or questioned. For the next hour, we outlined the structure, responsibilities, and immediate action items. With each decision, my path crystallized further. This wasn't merely reaction to betrayal. It was the culmination of years of unacknowledged preparation, as if some part of me had always known this day would come. When we finally concluded, the others filed out with clear assignments and a shared sense of purpose. Only Diane remained, studying me with an expression I couldn't quite read. What? I asked, closing my laptop. I've known you for 8 years, she said. This is the first time I've seen you look truly unburdened. I considered her observation. I've been carrying Rivercrest's legacy so long, I forgot what it felt like not to. And now? Now, I said, standing to leave. I build something that's truly mine. The law offices of Harrington and Myers occupied the top floor of a sleek downtown building, understated elegance that spoke of old money and quiet power. Unlike Rivercrest's ostentatious headquarters with my father's name emblazoned across, The facade, Harrington and Myers projected confidence without needing to announce it. Patricia Harrington herself met me in the reception area, her silver hair cut in a precise bob that matched her reputation for razor-sharp legal precision. "Samantha," she greeted me warmly but professionally. "Right this way." I followed her, through hushed corridors to a conference room where 3 other attorneys waited with document-laden tablets and focused expressions. No small talk, no time wasted. Exactly why I preferred Patricia's firm for sensitive matters. "Before we begin," Patricia said once we were seated, "I want to confirm that you understand the gravity of what you're undertaking. Competing with family businesses can become complicated." "I'm well aware," I replied, "but this isn't a spur-of-the-moment decision." "No," she agreed, studying me with experienced eyes. "I suspect it's been building for some time. Let's ensure it's executed correctly." For the next 2 hours, we meticulously reviewed incorporation documents, intellectual property transfers, licensing frameworks, and employment contracts. Each document represented another brick in the wall I was building between my past at Rivercrest and my future with Phoenix Automation. "The non-compete in your employment contract," one of the junior attorneys noted, "specifically prohibits working for or establishing a competing manufacturing company within 100 miles for 2 years after termination. Which is why Phoenix isn't a manufacturing company," I countered. "We're a technology company providing automation solutions. We don't produce physical goods." Patricia's smile was subtle but approving. "Additionally, the non-compete was revised 3 years ago when you received your last promotion. The language is specific to traditional manufacturing, not software or technology services. Another instance where my father's outdated understanding of business had created an exploitable gap. Vincent Parker saw manufacturing through the lens of his generation: factories, assembly lines, tangible products. The digital infrastructure that actually drove modern production was, to him, merely a support function rather than the core value proposition it had become." "What about client relationships?" I asked. "That's where this could get messy." Patricia nodded to another attorney who pulled up the relevant documents. "We've analyzed the client contracts. Most are with Rivercrest Corporate, as expected. However, 5 major clients have additional consulting agreements directly with you, personally." This was news to me. "Explain." "When you implemented the automation system, these clients contracted separately for your expertise in optimizing their own production processes. These agreements were structured as personal consulting contracts, not as Rivercrest services. I vaguely remembered signing those documents years ago, viewing them as formalities to satisfy legal requirements rather than consequential contracts. Diane had handled the details, as usual. So I could continue those consulting relationships independently? With certain parameters, yes. You couldn't solicit them to abandon Rivercrest entirely, but you could maintain the advisory relationship on automation optimization. A small advantage, but potentially significant. These 5 clients represented nearly 40% of Rivercrest's revenue. Having a direct, contractual relationship with them provided a legitimate channel of communication that wouldn't violate non-solicitation provisions. "There's something else," Patricia said, her tone shifting slightly. "During our due diligence, we discovered an interesting detail about Rivercrest's ownership structure." She slid a document across the table, a share certificate I'd never seen before. "This is a 5% equity stake in Rivercrest Industries, issued to you on your 10-year work anniversary. It appears your father never actually delivered the certificate to you, but the shares were properly registered with the corporate secretary." I stared at the document, memories flooding back. There had been a small ceremony, congratulatory speeches, a plaque, but no mention of actual equity. My father had spoken vaguely about recognizing my contribution to the company's value, but had never clarified what that recognition entailed. "I didn't know," I said quietly. Most people don't read the fine print on ceremonial occasions, Patricia observed dryly. Nevertheless, you own 5% of Rivercrest Industries, which provides certain minority shareholder rights under state law, including access to corporate books and records, the right to attend all shareholder meetings, and protection against actions that specifically devalue your shares. The implications slowly crystallized. My 5% stake wouldn't stop Neil's appointment or change my father's decisions, but it gave me visibility I wouldn't otherwise have, a legitimate seat at the table, however small. Could my father attempt to void this grant? Patricia shook her head. The shares were properly issued and registered. They're yours. He might claim you've breached fiduciary duties in other ways, but the ownership itself is secure. Another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Another truth hidden beneath Rivercrest's polished surface. What else don't I know about the company I helped build? I wondered aloud. The question hung in the air until Patricia responded pragmatically, "Let's find out." She instructed one of her associates to prepare a formal shareholder records request covering financial statements, board minutes, executive compensation, and related party transactions for the past 5 years. "File it today," she directed. "Standard language, but expedited time frame. They'll have 10 business days to comply." "My father will see this as a declaration of war," I noted, not entirely displeased by the prospect. "He might," Patricia agreed. "Or he might recognize it as due diligence by a minority shareholder exercising legitimate rights. Either way, the information will be valuable to you." As the meeting concluded, Patricia walked me to the elevator. "The incorporation papers for Phoenix will be filed within the hour. You'll be officially in business by close of day." The weight of the decision settled around me, not uncomfortably, but substantially. There would be no turning back after today. "Patricia," I asked as the elevator arrived, "have you handled many family business disputes?" Her expression softened. Slightly. "More than I care to count. They're rarely just about business." "How do they usually end?" "Honestly, most end with relationships damaged beyond repair." She held the elevator door. "But occasionally, they end with necessary truths finally acknowledged." I stepped into the elevator, considering her words. "And which outcome is more common?" "That depends entirely on what the family values more, control or connection." The doors began to close. "I suspect you already know which category Vincent Parker falls into." Indeed, I did. My father valued control above all else, over his company, his legacy, his family. It was why Neil's appointment as CEO made perfect emotional sense, even if it made poor business sense. My brother would preserve the illusion of Vincent Parker's continued control long after my father stepped aside. I, with my independent ideas and detailed understanding of operations, represented a transfer of true power rather than merely a title. As I exited the building, my phone vibrated with a text from Diane. "Incorporation complete. Phoenix exists. Also, your father's looking. For you. Apparently, Peterson Global is asking specifically for you on the call." A small victory, but satisfying nonetheless. Peterson Global, our largest client and one with whom I had a separate consulting agreement, wanted reassurance from the person they actually trusted, not from the figurehead being installed to satisfy my father's ego. I texted back, "Tell him I'm in meetings off-site all afternoon. Peterson can schedule directly with me tomorrow if they want. Let my father and brother handle the fallout. Let them experience even briefly what Rivercrest would be like without my involvement, my relationships, my knowledge." The truth was revealing itself hour by hour. Rivercrest needed me far more than I needed Rivercrest. And soon, everyone would know it. The summons came the following morning. A terse email from my father's executive assistant requesting my immediate presence in his office at 9 a.m. No subject line, no explanation. It wasn't a request, it was a command performance. I arrived at 9:15 deliberately, dressed in a charcoal suit that had always felt like armor in difficult negotiations. My father despised tardiness, viewing it as a sign of disrespect. Today, that was precisely the message I intended to send. His assistant avoided my eyes as she announced my arrival, another sign that whatever waited beyond those mahogany doors wasn't pleasant. I straightened my spine and entered without knocking. My father stood at the window overlooking the manufacturing floor below, hands clasped behind his back in his characteristic pose of authority. Neil sat in one of the visitor chairs, fidgeting with his watch, an expensive gift from my father on his 30th birthday. I'd received a company plaque on mine. "Close the door," my father instructed without turning. I did so, but remained, standing. Small assertions of independence. These were my new currency. "Would you care to explain this?" He turned finally, gesturing to a document on his desk. Even from several feet away, I recognized the shareholder records request filed by Patricia yesterday. News traveled fast, especially when it threatened the status quo. "It's exactly what it appears to be," I replied evenly. "A standard records request from a minority shareholder." Neil's head snapped up. "Minority shareholder? Since when?" "Since approximately 2 years ago," I answered, addressing him directly. "Though I only learned about it yesterday myself. It seems Dad registered shares in my name but never actually informed me of the equity grant." "It was intended as a surprise for your 15th anniversary with the company," my father interjected. His tone clipped. "Obviously, circumstances have changed." "Obviously," I echoed. "Though legally, those shares are still mine, along with the rights they confer." My father's jaw tightened. He hated being outmaneuvered almost as much as he hated displaying emotion. "This aggressive posturing is beneath you, Samantha. If you had questions about the company's records, you could have simply asked." Like I asked about the CEO succession planning, or the year-long evaluation process I wasn't informed was happening. I maintained a professional tone despite the anger simmering beneath. "Forgive me if I've learned that formal channels are necessary when dealing with Rivercrest leadership." Neil shifted uncomfortably. "Sam, this is getting out of hand. We're family." Interesting how family becomes relevant when it's convenient. I finally took a seat, crossing my legs casually. It wasn't a consideration when decisions were being made about the company's future. My father moved behind his desk, assuming the position of power he preferred for difficult conversations. "Your records request will be fulfilled within the statutory time frame." Was there anything else? His dismissive tone was so familiar, the same one he'd used throughout my childhood when ending conversations that displeased him. But I wasn't a child anymore, and this conversation was far from over. "Actually, yes. I'd like to discuss the automation system." A flicker of annoyance crossed his face. "What about it?" "I've been reviewing the licensing agreement between myself and Rivercrest." I removed a folder from my briefcase, opening it deliberately. There are certain provisions regarding leadership changes that require attention. Neil leaned forward. "What is she talking about?" My father's expression remained impassive, but I caught the slight tightening around his eyes. He understood immediately what I was implying. "The system is company property, developed on company time with company resources. The core architecture and implementation rights are my intellectual property," I corrected, "properly registered and protected. Rivercrest holds a usage license with specific terms and conditions." I slid the relevant document across his desk, the same one Eliza had referenced in our meeting. "This is absurd," my father dismissed without even glancing at the paper. "No court would uphold such an arrangement." "Patricia Harrington disagrees." I let the name hang in the air, knowing my father respected and feared her reputation, as does the intellectual property division at Mercer and Williams. I named another prestigious firm, one Rivercrest had used for patent matters in the past. For the first time, uncertainty flickered in my father's expression. What exactly are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything. I'm stating facts. The automation system that runs this entire operation, that enabled our expansion to $50 million in revenue, remains my intellectual property. Rivercrest's license to use it is contingent on conditions that are about to be violated. Neil stood abruptly. Is this blackmail? You're threatening to what? Disable our systems if you don't get the CEO position. I've never asked for the CEO position, Neil. I met his gaze calmly. Not once. I simply expected professional consideration based on performance rather than familial preference. This is what it's always been about with you. My father cut in, his voice hardening. Resentment. Competition with your brother. You've never seen the bigger picture. The bigger picture, I repeated, letting out a small, incredulous laugh. Do either of you actually understand how the automation system works? Could you explain to Peterson Global or Axiom Manufacturing or any of our top clients exactly what happens when they submit an order through our proprietary platform? Their silence was answer enough. I built that system. I established those client relationships. I restructured our entire operation from a failing regional manufacturer to an industry leader. I leaned forward slightly. That's not resentment. Talking. That's verifiable fact. My father's expression darkened. And now you intend to hold the company hostage unless we reconsider Neil's appointment. You misunderstand me. I gathered my materials, preparing to leave. I'm not asking you to reconsider anything. The decision has been made, and I accept it completely. Confusion crossed both their faces. Then what? Neil began. I'm resigning. Effective immediately. I placed my resignation letter on the IE desk. Standard notice period waived, as I'm sure you'll agree is best for all parties. My father stared at the letter without touching it. And the automation system? Rivercrest's license remains valid for 30 days from today. After that, you'll need to make alternative arrangements. I stood, straightening my jacket. I suggest you use that time to understand exactly how the system works. The documentation is comprehensive, though admittedly technical. This is corporate sabotage, my father snapped, finally showing the anger he'd been suppressing. The board won't stand for it. I won't stand for it. It's business, I corrected him. Something you taught me from childhood takes precedence over personal feelings. I'm simply protecting my intellectual property as any prudent business person would. Neil looked genuinely bewildered. Where will you go? What will you do? I've incorporated a new venture. I met my father's gaze directly. Phoenix Automation Systems. We'll be offering advanced manufacturing automation solutions to select clients beginning next month. The color drained from my father's face, as the full implications became clear. You're competing directly against us. Not at all. Rivercrest manufactures products. Phoenix provides technology services. Different industries entirely. I gestured to the documents on his desk. It's all perfectly legal, well within the boundaries of my non-compete agreement. Patricia was quite thorough. My father stood slowly, his voice dangerously quiet. You would destroy what 3 generations of Parkers have built over a perceived slight? Over not getting your way? The accusation might have wounded me once, but I'd moved beyond seeking his approval or fearing his disappointment. I'm building something new, I replied simply. Just as you did when you took over from grandfather. Just as you're allowing Neil to do now. The only difference is that I'm doing it without the advantage of inheriting a pre-existing company. I moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing. Peterson Global has reached out to schedule a demonstration of our automation services next week. They seemed quite interested in understanding options beyond Rivercrest's ecosystem. My father's expression hardened to granite. Get out. Gladly. I opened the door, then delivered my parting shot. Neil, I suggest you cancel your vacation plans for the next few months. The learning curve on our systems is quite steep. As I walked through the executive suite for the last time, I felt strangely weightless. 12 years of proving myself, of seeking validation, of building someone else's legacy, all of it falling away with each step toward the exit. Raj waited by the elevator, a cardboard box of my personal items already packed. Always efficient, always one step ahead. Ready? He asked simply. I took one last look at the Rivercrest logo emblazoned on the wall. The company my grandfather had started, my father had grown, and I had transformed. More than ready, I replied. The elevator doors closed on my old life and opened moments later to my new one. Phoenix Automation Systems' first office was nothing like Rivercrest's imposing headquarters. We leased the top floor of a converted industrial building in the city's rapidly developing tech district, exposed brick walls, enormous windows, and an open floor plan that encouraged collaboration rather than hierarchy. No mahogany doors, no executive suite, no corner office with my name on it. I loved it immediately. Furniture arrives tomorrow, Diane announced, consulting her tablet as we stood in the empty space. Workstations by Thursday, network infrastructure Friday. We'll be operational by Monday. Ahead of schedule, I noted appreciatively. The Peterson Global Demonstration is Wednesday. We'll need at least the conference room set up by then. Already prioritized, she assured me. The AV team is coming Saturday. Eliza and her development team had commandeered a corner, sitting cross-legged on the floor with laptops open, already reconfiguring the automation system for our new business model. The energy in the room, excitement mixed with purpose, felt nothing like Rivercrest's careful corporate polish. Our marketing materials just arrived, Raj called from near the entrance, opening a box of freshly printed brochures. Want to see? The Phoenix Automation Systems logo, a stylized circuit board in the shape of a rising phoenix, looked sophisticated and modern against the matte black background. Another deliberate contrast to Rivercrest's traditional navy and gold. My phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Normally, I'd let unknown calls go to voicemail, but in these transitional days, every call could be significant. Samantha Parker, I answered, stepping away from the group. Ms. Parker, Gerald Whitfield here. I froze momentarily. Gerald was Rivercrest's VP of Sales, my father's loyal lieutenant for over 20 years, and Neil's enthusiastic supporter at the executive dinner announcement. Gerald, this is unexpected. I imagine so. His voice sounded strained. I need to meet with you. Today, if possible. Privately. Wariness crept through me. Regarding? Not over the phone. He lowered his voice. Let's just say I've been reviewing certain technical documentation since your departure yesterday. We need to talk. Interesting. Gerald had never shown much interest in the automation system beyond how it improved sales metrics. What had changed? I'm rather busy today, I replied noncommittally. Please. The word sounded foreign coming from him. Gerald Whitfield didn't say please to anyone except my father. 1 hour of your time. Name the place. Curiosity won over caution. There's a coffee shop called Analog on Westbrook Street. 4 o'clock. I'll be there. After hanging up, I caught Diane's questioning look. Gerald Whitfield wants to meet. Her eyebrows rose. Spy mission from your father? Maybe. I considered the possibilities. Or something else entirely. Want me to come as backup? I shook my head. Let's see what he wants first, but stay within texting range. Analog was busy enough at 4 to provide anonymity, but quiet enough for conversation. I arrived 15 minutes early, selecting a corner table with a clear view of the entrance and both exits, a habit formed through years of business negotiations. Gerald arrived precisely on time, scanning the room nervously before spotting me. He looked different outside Rivercrest's walls. Smaller somehow, less certain. The confident sales executive persona had slipped, revealing someone older and more worried. "Thank you for meeting me," he said, settling into the chair across from me, declining the offered coffee. "What can I do for Rivercrest's VP of Sales?" I asked directly. He winced slightly. "Former VP of Sales as of 2 hours ago." That was unexpected. "You resigned?" "Not exactly." He straightened his tie, a nervous habit I'd noticed over years of boardroom meetings. "Neil asked for my resignation this morning, said he wanted to bring in his own team for sales leadership." The pieces clicked together. My father and brother were moving quickly to consolidate control, eliminating potential allies or anyone who might question the new leadership structure. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said carefully, "but I'm not sure how I can help." Gerald leaned forward, lowering his voice. "For 23 years, I've been loyal to Rivercrest, to your father. I believed in the company's mission, its values. Yesterday, after you left, I watched Vincent and Neil in damage control mode, trying to understand what your departure meant for operations." He shook his head slightly. "They don't have a clue how the automation system actually works. Not even the basics." Neil kept asking about backup disks, as if the entire integrated platform could be reinstalled from some DVD in a drawer somewhere. Despite everything, I felt a flash of sympathy for my brother. Neil had been set up for failure by the same person who had undermined me, our father, who cared more about control than competence. "That's not my problem anymore," I said, though without real heat. "It's not," Gerald agreed, "but this might interest you. After you left, I pulled the client satisfaction surveys from the last 3 years. Do you know what the single most cited reason for client loyalty to Rivercrest was?" I had a good idea, but let him continue. "Not price, not product quality, though that rated highly. It was, and I quote, innovative technology solutions and responsive technical support." He tapped the table for emphasis. "You, your team, your system. That's what clients valued most. Again, not my..." I brought these findings to Vincent and Neil this morning. He continued, cutting me off. "Suggested they might want to reconsider their approach to the automation system transition. Maybe even reach out to you about a more collaborative solution." "I'm guessing that went poorly." Gerald's laugh was short and bitter. "Neil accused me of undermining his authority. Vincent suggested my age might be affecting my judgment. By noon, I was packing my desk." I studied him carefully. Gerald was approaching retirement age, had always been well compensated, and as far as I knew, had no financial concerns. His sudden dismissal was unfortunate, but hardly catastrophic. "Why are you telling me this?" He met my gaze directly. "Because I'm not the only one. 3 division heads received similar treatment this morning. All people who worked closely with you, who understood your value to the company." My stomach tightened. I hadn't anticipated my father and brother would move so aggressively against perceived allies of mine. I thought of the dozens of people still at Rivercrest whose careers might now be in jeopardy simply by association. "That's concerning," I admitted, "but still doesn't explain why you wanted to meet." Gerald reached into his jacket, removing a folded document. "The client list you see here represents approximately 35% of Rivercrest's current revenue. All of them have worked directly with me for years. All of them have expressed specific appreciation for the automation platform you developed." He slid the paper across the table. "And none of them have exclusivity agreements that would prevent them from working with another vendor." I stared at the document without touching it, understanding exactly what he was offering. "You want to join Phoenix?" He nodded once. "With my client relationships and your technology, we could transition a significant portion of Rivercrest's business. Within months, not years." The proposition was more aggressive than anything I'd planned. Taking the automation system was one thing. Actively poaching a third of Rivercrest's clients was another entirely. It would devastate the company my grandfather had founded, potentially putting hundreds of jobs at risk. "Gerald," I said slowly, "why would you do this? You've been loyal to my father for decades." Something hardened in his expression. "I joined Rivercrest under your grandfather's leadership. He valued people based on performance, not personal loyalty tests. Vincent changed that culture gradually, but it was still a place where excellence mattered." He gestured to the document. "What happened yesterday, and today, makes it clear that's no longer the case." I considered his words carefully. Was this a genuine offer from someone whose professional values had been violated? Or an elaborate trap orchestrated by my father to catch me in legally questionable behavior? "I need to think about this," I said finally. "Of course." He stood to leave. "My contact information is on the last page, but don't think too long. Neil has already scheduled meetings with my client list for next week." After he departed, I sat motionless, staring at the list of clients, companies I had worked with. Personally, over the years, relationships I had helped nurture alongside Gerald. The potential advantage they represented was significant, perhaps game-changing for Phoenix's launch. But the risk was equally substantial. I called Diane. "I need Patricia Harrington to meet us at the office in an hour. And contact Eliza. We need to understand exactly what client transitions would look like technically." "That's serious?" Diane asked. "That complicated," I corrected, gathering my things. "We have an unexpected opportunity, or possibly a serious problem." As I navigated back toward our new office, I realized that my father's aggressive response had created something I hadn't anticipated. Allies beyond my immediate circle. People who recognized that Rivercrest's success had never been about the Parker name alone, but about the systems, relationships, and expertise that actually drove the business forward. The question now was how to leverage these unexpected alliances without descending to my father's level, without allowing revenge to override responsibility. "Legally speaking, there's nothing preventing you from hiring Gerald," Patricia Harrington explained, pacing the bare concrete floor of Phoenix's conference room. "His non-compete expired last year when Vincent decided company-wide renewals were too expensive to implement. Another cost-cutting measure that had seemed wise at the time but now created vulnerability. My father's financial decisions were coming back to haunt him in ways he couldn't have anticipated." "And the client list?" I asked. "Trickier," Patricia admitted. "While Gerald can certainly join Phoenix and even reach out to inform clients of his new position, actively soliciting them to leave Rivercrest could trigger tortious interference claims." Diane, who had been taking meticulous notes, looked up. "What if the clients approach us?" Patricia's smile was slight, but significant. "Then it becomes the client's decision to explore alternative vendors, completely defensible." I considered this carefully. "So if Gerald were to notify his clients that he's joined Phoenix and they subsequently requested information about our services?" "Standard business practice," Patricia confirmed. "The key is documentation and timing. Each step must be clearly defensible as normal business operations rather than targeted poaching." Eliza, who had been listening silently, finally spoke up. "From a technical standpoint, transitioning clients would be straightforward. The system was designed to be modular. We could implement individualized solutions that interface with their existing infrastructure without requiring complete system overhauls." I nodded, the pieces falling into place. "So we can offer clients an enhanced version of what they already value without forcing them to choose exclusively between Rivercrest and Phoenix." "Exactly," Eliza confirmed. "They could maintain manufacturing relationships with Rivercrest while transitioning automation services to us. A phased approach that minimizes disruption to their operations." The solution felt right, strategically sound without being needlessly destructive. I wasn't interested in decimating Rivercrest overnight. That would harm hundreds of employees who had nothing to do with my father's decisions. But creating a viable alternative for clients who valued innovation over tradition. That was business, not revenge. Let's move forward with Gerald, I decided. Standard employment agreement, no special incentives tied to client acquisition. That could be construed as poaching incentives. Patricia nodded approvingly. I'll prepare the paperwork tonight. As the meeting dispersed, Raj appeared at the door. Peterson Global confirmed for Wednesday's demonstration. Their entire executive team will be attending. This was significant. Peterson typically sent mid-level managers for vendor presentations, reserving executive attendance for established partners. Their interest in Phoenix suggested they were taking our emergence very seriously. Thank you, Raj. I glanced at Eliza. Is the demo environment ready? Nearly. We're implementing the enhanced production sequencing module tonight. By Wednesday, we'll have a fully functional demonstration that showcases capabilities beyond what they're currently using at Rivercrest. Perfect. I turned to Diane. Where are we on staffing? Beyond Gerald, what's our recruitment strategy? She consulted her tablet. We've received 14 applications from current Rivercrest employees since yesterday. 6 from the development team, 4 from client services, 3 from operations, and 1 from marketing. I frowned. I don't want to be accused of raiding their workforce. We're not actively recruiting, Diane clarified. They're approaching us. Apparently, Neil's management style is creating concern. Meaning? He's instituted daily reporting requirements for all departments, questioning decisions that were previously within departmental authority, and has twice mentioned the possibility of outsourcing development work to cut costs. Classic insecurity behaviors from someone promoted beyond their competence. Neil was grasping for control without understanding what he was controlling. Process the applications according to our established criteria, I instructed. No preferential treatment for ex-Rivercrest employees, but no penalties either. Merit-based decisions only. My phone rang, another unknown number. Ordinarily, I might have let it go to voicemail, but given Gerald's unexpected approach yesterday, I decided to answer. Samantha Parker. Miss Parker, this is Elizabeth Warren from Becker & Holloway. The name of the prestigious executive search firm immediately caught my attention. Do you have a moment to speak privately? I excused myself from the room, finding a quiet corner in our still mostly empty office space. I'm listening. I've been retained by the board of Meridian Technologies to identify candidates for their CTO position. Your name has come up repeatedly in our research, particularly regarding the automation systems you developed at Rivercrest. Meridian was a major player in the manufacturing sector, 3 times Rivercrest's size with international operations across 12 countries. Under normal circumstances, such a call would have been flattering, perhaps even tempting. I'm flattered by the interest, I replied carefully, but I've just launched Phoenix Automation Systems. I'm not looking for new opportunities at the moment. I understand. Elizabeth's tone remained professional but persistent. However, the board specifically asked me to reach out even after learning of your new venture. They're interested in discussing potential collaboration models, including possible acquisition of Phoenix. An acquisition offer already? We'd barely opened our doors. Either Meridian was extraordinarily aggressive in their market strategy, or someone was feeding them information about Phoenix's potential impact. That seems premature, given Phoenix hasn't even officially launched our services, I observed. Perhaps. Or perhaps Meridian recognizes transformative technology when they see it. She paused meaningfully. They're prepared to be very generous in their valuation. I appreciate the interest, but Phoenix isn't for sale. We've barely begun what we intend to build. Of course, but should your perspective change, the offer remains open. The board has authorized me to arrange a meeting at your convenience. After ending the call, I leaned against the wall, processing this unexpected development. An acquisition offer this early suggested Phoenix had already created significant industry ripples. It also raised an interesting question. Was this a legitimate interest in our technology, or a strategic move by a Rivercrest ally to neutralize a potential competitor before we gained momentum? Diane found me still contemplating this question. Everything okay? Meridian Technologies just made an indirect acquisition overture through Becker and Holloway. Her eyebrows rose. That's remarkably quick. Too quick, I agreed. Let's do some discrete research into Meridian's board composition and recent business relationships. I want to know if they have any significant connections to Rivercrest or my father. She nodded, already typing notes into her tablet. On it. What's your gut telling you? That we've hit a nerve, and that Phoenix might be an even more valuable proposition than we initially calculated. Back in the main workspace, I found Eliza surrounded by her development team, all intently focused on a complex schema displayed across multiple screens. Problem? I asked. She shook her head. Opportunity. We've been diagramming potential expansions to the core system architecture. If we rebuild certain components from the ground up, rather than adapting the Rivercrest framework, we could increase processing efficiency by approximately 35%. One of the younger developers, Ben, whom I'd recruited directly from MIT 3 years ago, looked up excitedly. The distributed processing model we've been sketching would also enable real-time integration with supply chain management systems in ways the original architecture couldn't support. Timeline? I asked. 2 months for core redesign. Another month for testing and integration protocols. Eliza's estimation was always precise, never promising more than she could deliver. The end result would be a system generations ahead of what Rivercrest is currently using. Resources needed? 2 more senior developers minimum, and dedicated server infrastructure rather than cloud services for the development environment. Significant investments, but potentially game-changing outcomes. This was exactly the kind of innovation I'd fought for at Rivercrest, often against my father's resistance to what he considered speculative expenditures. Draft a formal proposal with projected costs and expected outcomes, I decided. We'll review it tomorrow morning. As the afternoon progressed, Phoenix's empty space gradually transformed. Furniture deliveries arrived, IT teams installed network infrastructure, and the energy of purposeful creation filled what had been vacant. Rooms just days before. I retreated to my temporary office, a small glass-walled space that would eventually become a meeting room once our permanent layout was completed. Unlike the imposing executive suite I'd occupied at Rivercrest, this office had no impressive view, no mahogany desk, no trappings of corporate status. And yet, I felt more empowered here than I ever had in that carefully designed space. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Heard about your new venture. Impressive move. Coffee sometime? Michael Bennett. Michael Bennett, CEO of TechCore Solutions and one of Rivercrest's most formidable competitors. We'd met occasionally at industry events, but had never engaged beyond professional courtesies. His sudden interest couldn't be coincidence. The industry grapevine was clearly active, with Phoenix at the center of attention. First Gerald's approach, then Meridian's acquisition overture, now Michael's casual outreach. Each represented different opportunities, different potential alliances in the new business landscape I was creating. I texted back a non-committal but polite response, promising to reach out when things settled. Strategic ambiguity served me best until Phoenix's foundations were more firmly established. A knock at my door interrupted these considerations. Raj entered, carrying a sleek black envelope. This was just messenger delivered, from Rivercrest. My name was handwritten on the envelope in my father's distinctive script. No corporate letterhead, no formal addressing, a personal communication that somehow felt more ominous than any legal notice. Inside was a single sheet of Rivercrest's premium stationery, bearing just 3 lines in my father's handwriting. Board meeting tomorrow, 10 a.m. Your 5% shareholding grants you attendance rights. Exercise them if you wish to discuss reasonable resolutions before irreparable damage occurs. No signature. None was needed. Interesting timing, I remarked, showing the note to Raj. The day before our Peterson Global presentation. A distraction. Tactic? He suggested. Possibly. Or perhaps he's genuinely concerned about irreparable damage. I considered the implications. Either way, it's a strategic error. How so? He's acknowledging Phoenix as a legitimate threat, elevating us from nuisance to genuine competitor in less than a week. I placed the note in my desk drawer. And he's revealed his concern, which weakens his negotiating position. Will you go? An excellent question. Attending would provide valuable intelligence on Rivercrest's response strategies and board sentiment. It would also assert my legitimate shareholder rights, establishing precedent for future involvement. However, it would also drain focus and emotional energy the day before our critical Peterson presentation. My father was undoubtedly counting on that, on my ingrained habit of responding to his summons, of prioritizing Rivercrest's concerns over my own objectives. No, I decided. Phoenix takes precedence. Patricia can attend as my proxy and provide a full briefing afterward. Raj nodded, neither approving nor questioning, simply accepting my decision with the quiet competence that made him invaluable. As he turned to leave, I added, "And Raj, make sure tomorrow's schedule includes adequate preparation time for everyone involved in the Peterson presentation. No late nights, no last-minute revisions. We present from a position of confidence, not desperation." "Already arranged," he confirmed with a slight smile. "The team knows this one matters." Left alone again, I found myself reflecting on how quickly the dynamics had shifted. A week ago, I had been Rivercrest's COO, carefully, navigating corporate politics and family expectations. Now, I was building something entirely new, making decisions based solely on what would best serve Phoenix's future rather than what would please my father or accommodate my brother. The freedom was exhilarating and terrifying. My phone buzzed. Again, my mother this time. We spoke occasionally but weren't particularly close. Her divorce from my father 15 years ago had created a distance neither of us had fully bridged. "Heard about your new venture. Your father called to warn me you might reach out for investment. Told him you've never needed his money or mine. Proud of you for standing on your own. Let's have dinner next week." The message brought an unexpected lump to my throat. My mother had always seen my independence as strength rather than defiance. In her own way, she'd been preparing me for this moment since childhood, teaching me to value my own judgment above others' expectations. I typed back, "Dinner sounds good. Much to catch up on." Another text arrived moments later, this one from a college friend who had become a respected industry journalist. Hearing rumors about a significant new player in manufacturing automation launched by a former Rivercrest executive. Care to comment? For an upcoming feature? News was spreading faster than anticipated. The industry was small, and disruption was always newsworthy. I forwarded the message to our newly hired PR consultant with a note. "Let's be strategic about this. Not looking to create unnecessary drama, but we should control the narrative." When I finally left the office that evening, the Phoenix team was still hard at work. Eliza's development group clustered around whiteboards, Diane reviewing financial projections, Raj organizing the empty space into what would soon be a fully functional headquarters. This wasn't just my company. It was becoming our company. People who had chosen to follow me not out of family obligation, but because they believed in what we were building. People whose talents had perhaps been undervalued in the rigid hierarchy of Rivercrest, but could flourish in Phoenix's more collaborative environment. The realization was both humbling and energizing. I wasn't just redefining my own professional identity. I was creating space for others to redefine theirs as well. At home, I poured a single glass of wine and settled onto my balcony with the folder of Phoenix materials we'd prepared for the Peterson Global presentation. As I reviewed the contents, I felt none of the anxiety that had accompanied similar Rivercrest presentations, no fear of disappointing my father, no pressure to justify my approaches to skeptical board members, no need to carefully manage Neil's involvement to prevent mishaps, just confidence in our offering, our team, and our vision. My phone rang again. This time a number I recognized all too well. My father. After 4 rings, it went to voicemail. Whatever he wanted to say could wait. I was done responding to summons and commands. The old Samantha, the dutiful daughter, the loyal executive, might have answered immediately, might have felt guilty for the distance growing between us, might have sought some path to reconciliation even now. But I wasn't that person anymore. Phoenix wasn't just a new company, it was becoming my new identity, an integration of professional ambition and personal autonomy I'd never fully experienced at Rivercrest. The balcony offered a perfect view of the city skyline, lights glimmering. Against the darkening sky, somewhere among those buildings stood Rivercrest headquarters, where my father was likely still working, perhaps with Neil, trying to counter a threat they hadn't anticipated and still didn't fully comprehend. And here I sat, building something they couldn't control, couldn't diminish, couldn't claim as their own. That, perhaps, was the most valuable thing I'd taken with me when I left. Not the intellectual property, not the client relationships, not even the talented team members who'd chosen to follow me. I'd taken my future, and that was worth more than any title my father could have bestowed or withheld. The day of the Peterson Global presentation arrived with perfect symbolic timing. Exactly 1 week since my father had announced Neil as CEO. In 7 days, I had resigned from Rivercrest, incorporated Phoenix, assembled a core team, and prepared to potentially secure our first major client. I arrived at our office at 6:30 a.m., wanting quiet time to review the presentation materials one final time before the team arrived. The sun was just beginning to illuminate our open concept space, casting long shadows across the newly installed workstations. In the conference room, the presentation equipment had been meticulously set up the previous evening. Interactive displays embedded in what appeared to be traditional wooden walls, a demonstration station where the automation system interface would project onto a sleek glass table, comfortable seating arranged to encourage collaboration rather than hierarchy. Patricia had called the night before with a detailed report from the Rivercrest board meeting. Your father spent 40 minutes discussing the temporary disruption caused by your departure, she had explained. 3 board members asked pointed questions about succession planning and why they weren't consulted earlier about Neil's appointment. And Neil? I had asked, curious about my brother's performance. Visibly uncomfortable, Patricia had replied. Especially when the CFO presented projections showing significant revenue impact if Peterson Global reduces their contract scope. This intelligence confirmed what I'd suspected. Rivercrest was vulnerable, and today's presentation could potentially shift the industry landscape dramatically. Not just for Phoenix and Rivercrest, but for manufacturing automation as a whole. Diane arrived at 7:15, coffee in hand. Couldn't sleep either, she asked, setting a cup on my desk. More like strategic early arrival, I replied with a smile. Everything ready? Absolutely. She handed me a tablet with the final presentation flow. The team will be here by 8 for final preparations. Peterson's delegation arrives at 10. I reviewed the agenda, noting the careful sequencing, beginning with broad industry challenges, transitioning to specific inefficiencies in current systems, then unveiling Phoenix's enhanced solutions as the natural evolution of manufacturing automation. Not once did the presentation explicitly mention Rivercrest or position Phoenix as a competitor. We didn't need to. The improvements would speak for themselves. This is excellent, Diane. Professional, focused on value rather than competition. Gerald helped refine the approach, she acknowledged. He suggested emphasizing forward-looking solutions rather than comparisons to existing systems. Said, Peterson's board responds better to innovation than criticism. Gerald's insights into client psychology were already proving valuable. His understanding of key decision-makers' preferences and priorities gave Phoenix an edge that raw technical superiority alone couldn't provide. By 9, our office hummed with focused energy. Eliza and her development team conducted final system checks, Raj coordinated with catering for the post-presentation lunch, and our newly hired staff, a mix of former Rivercrest employees and fresh talent, prepared supporting materials and reference documentation. They're here, Raj announced at 9:50, glancing at his tablet. 6 executives including their CEO, CTO, and CFO. I smoothed my charcoal suit, different from the one I'd worn to confront my father, but equally powerful. Let's welcome them. As the Peterson delegation entered, I noted their expressions carefully. Curiosity, certainly. Skepticism, predictably. But also something less expected. Eagerness. Particularly from Thomas Peterson himself, the founder's grandson who now served as CEO. Samantha, he greeted me warmly, clasping my hand. Or should I say, President Parker now. Just Samantha is fine, Thomas. Thank you for coming on such short notice. When Peterson Global's most reliable contact at Rivercrest suddenly launches a new venture, we pay attention. His smile was genuine, but assessment was clear in his eyes. Though I admit, your father wasn't pleased when I mentioned we'd be meeting with you today. Of course, Vincent had attempted to intervene. I appreciate your independent judgment. We've worked with Rivercrest for 15 years, Thomas continued as we walked toward the conference room. Your grandfather was one of my grandfather's first major suppliers. Family businesses understand each other. The comment carried subtle weight. He was acknowledging the personal dimension of my separation from Rivercrest, recognizing that this wasn't merely a standard executive departure, but something with deeper implications, which sometimes makes objective business decisions more complicated, I observed. Indeed. He glanced around our modern office space. This is quite different from Rivercrest's traditional environment. Intentionally so, I confirmed, guiding the group into our conference room. Thomas introduced his team, a mix of longtime executives I'd worked with previously and newer faces I recognized only from industry events. They settled into the carefully arranged seating, acceptance packets waiting at each place. I began with a brief overview of Phoenix's vision, deliberately avoiding any mention of my history with Rivercrest or the circumstances of our founding. This wasn't about the past. It was about the future we were offering. Eliza then took the lead for the technical demonstration, showcasing Phoenix's enhanced version of the automation system, now featuring predictive maintenance protocols and real-time supply chain adaptability that Rivercrest's version lacked. These improvements, Peterson's CTO noted, leaning forward with interest, they're significant. The adaptive resource allocation alone would reduce our production planning cycle by nearly 40%. How quickly could they be implemented in our existing framework? 4 weeks for initial integration, Eliza answered confidently. Full functionality within 8 weeks. We've designed an implementation schedule specifically for Peterson's requirements. She pulled up a detailed timeline on the display, highlighting key milestones and expected outcomes at each phase. I watched Thomas Peterson's expression as he absorbed the information. His company had been with Rivercrest for 15 years. One of my father's earliest major clients, and now their largest by revenue. Any change in that relationship would send shockwaves through both companies and the industry at large. The security protocols have been enhanced as well? Their cybersecurity? Director asked, studying the architecture diagram. Completely rebuilt, Eliza confirmed. We've implemented quantum-resistant encryption protocols and distributed authentication frameworks that exceed current industry standards by several generations. Technical questions continued for nearly an hour, growing increasingly specific and detailed, a sign of genuine interest rather than polite courtesy. Our team handled each inquiry with precision and confidence, the preparation of the previous days evident in their comprehensive responses. Cost structure? Peterson's CFO inquired, ever practical. Diane stepped forward, outlining our pricing model, deliberately set just below Rivercrest's current rates, despite offering enhanced functionality. We've structured both subscription and perpetual licensing options, she explained, displaying the comparative analysis. Both include quarterly update packages and priority support channels. As the formal presentation concluded, Thomas asked the question I'd been anticipating. And Rivercrest? How would this affect our existing manufacturing contracts? The room quieted, all attention focused on my response. This was the crux of the entire proposition, the delicate balance between disruption and continuity that would determine Peterson's decision. Phoenix doesn't compete in manufacturing, I explained carefully. We're focused exclusively on automation technology. You could maintain your production relationship with Rivercrest while transitioning automation services to us. A phased approach that minimizes disruption to your operations, while maximizing disruption to Rivercrest's business model, Thomas observed shrewdly. I didn't deny it. The automation system represents significant value in your relationship with Rivercrest, value that originated with my team, most of whom have joined Phoenix. And legally? Their general counsel spoke for the first time, his expression professionally neutral. The intellectual property rights are clearly established, I assured him. Patricia Harrington has prepared a complete documentation package for your legal team's review. Everything is above board and properly registered, including the contractual transition provisions, he pressed. Especially those. I met his gaze directly. The original licensing agreement between myself and Rivercrest included specific clauses regarding leadership changes and intellectual property control, all properly executed and witnessed at the time of implementation. This seemed to satisfy him, though I knew their legal team would scrutinize every comma and clause before any agreement was finalized. The presentation continued with a detailed implementation roadmap, demonstration of client-specific customization options, and in-depth security briefing. By the time we broke for the catered lunch, the energy in the room had shifted noticeably, from professional curiosity to active engagement, with Peterson's team asking questions that presumed collaboration rather than merely exploring possibilities. During lunch, their executives dispersed to mingle with our team, technical specialists engaging with Eliza's developers, operations personnel discussing integration timelines with Raj, finance representatives reviewing contract details with Diane. Thomas remained with me, observing these interactions with evident interest. Your team is impressive, he noted as we moved to a quieter corner, especially considering how recently you've assembled them. Most of us have worked together for years, I explained, just in a different environment. At Rivercrest. He didn't phrase it as a question, which raises concerns about potential non-compete issues. Already addressed, I assured him. Patricia Harrington has vetted each employment contract individually. Everyone here is legally clear to work with Phoenix without restriction. Vincent was always careless with legal details he considered administrative, Thomas observed with surprising insight. Something your grandfather never would have allowed. The comment revealed deeper knowledge of Rivercrest's history than I'd expected. You knew my grandfather well? Well enough to understand the differences between his leadership and your father's. Thomas studied me with renewed interest. Joseph Parker built Rivercrest on relationships and innovation. Vincent transformed it into a traditional hierarchy with traditional limitations. And now? I asked, curious about his assessment. Now, Rivercrest faces a choice between evolution and obsolescence. He gestured toward the interactive displays where our system architecture was still visible. This technology represents the future of manufacturing automation. The question is whether Rivercrest can adapt without you. When the formal portion of the visit resumed, the discussion shifted from technical specifications to practical implementation, contract, structures, transition timelines, support protocols. These weren't hypothetical discussions. They were the detailed negotiations that preceded actual partnership decisions. As the meeting concluded, Thomas remained behind as his team filed out to their waiting cars. "Walk with me?" he suggested, gesturing toward the windows overlooking the city. I joined him, curious about what he wanted to discuss privately. "Your father called me personally 3 days ago," he began, gazing at the skyline. "First time in nearly 5 years he's reached out directly rather than through account managers. Wanted to assure me that Rivercrest's transition would be seamless despite your departure." I waited, letting him continue. "I've known Vincent Parker for 20 years, Thomas said thoughtfully. Respected him. But I've watched Rivercrest's evolution over the past decade, and it's been clear to anyone paying attention who was actually driving innovation there." He turned to face me directly. "The automation system changed everything for us. Reduced our production planning cycle from weeks to days, integrated our supply chain in ways we hadn't thought possible. That wasn't Vincent's vision. It was yours." I acknowledged this with a slight nod, careful not to appear boastful. "Why did you really leave, Samantha?" Beyond the official story, Vincent's people are sharing about pursuing independent opportunities. The question was direct, personal, crossing the usual boundaries of business relationships. But Thomas Peterson wasn't just any client. He represented the kind of partnership that could define Phoenix's future. "My father made a succession decision based on family dynamics rather than business logic," I answered, matching his directness. "I decided to build something that would be valued for its performance rather than its pedigree." Thomas nodded, seemingly satisfied with my honesty. "Family businesses are complicated beasts. My grandfather nearly drove this company into the ground trying to force my uncle into leadership despite clear evidence he wasn't suited for it." "What happened?" I asked, genuinely curious. "The board finally intervened," Thomas replied. "Convinced my grandfather that legacy isn't just about bloodlines. It's about securing the company's future. My uncle was given a division chairmanship, where he could contribute without controlling critical operations. A more elegant solution than my father had considered with Neil, one that might have worked at Rivercrest, had Vincent been willing to prioritize company health over absolute control. Your brother, Thomas continued perceptively. He wasn't ready for the CEO position. No, I agreed simply. He wasn't. And now he's struggling with a system he doesn't understand, clients who expected you at the helm, and a market that's about to be disrupted by the very technology that made Rivercrest successful. Thomas's assessment was blunt but accurate. Your father has placed him in an impossible position. The observation carried no judgment, just recognition of the EDE business reality we both understood. Neil had been set up to fail by the same decision that had driven me away. We'll be reviewing your proposal thoroughly over the next week, Thomas said, returning to a more formal tone. But I want you to know something unofficially. I admire what you're doing. Breaking away, starting fresh. It takes courage. Thank you, I replied, genuinely appreciative of his understanding. Don't thank me yet, he cautioned with a slight smile. If we transition to Phoenix, Vincent will consider it a personal betrayal. He'll make things difficult for both of us. I'm aware. Are you prepared for that level of conflict? For what it might do to your family relationships long-term? The question struck deeper than he could know. Despite everything, Some part of me still hoped that eventually, perhaps years from now, my father might recognize the legitimacy of my choices, that Neil might understand I hadn't acted out of jealousy, but out of self-respect. Business decisions. And family emotions are separate considerations, I said finally. I can manage both. Thomas studied me for a moment longer before extending his hand. We'll be in touch by early next week. In the meantime, I suggest you prepare for significant interest once news of this meeting circulates. If Peterson moves, others will follow. After he departed, I remained at the window, watching the Peterson delegation's cars pull away. The FI presentation had gone better than even our most optimistic projections, but Thomas's parting question lingered uncomfortably. Was I prepared for what might come next? For the industry tremors that would follow if Peterson Global, the gold standard, in our sector, switched allegiance? For my father's reaction when he realized I wasn't simply establishing a small consulting firm, but potentially redirecting the course of the business he'd spent his life building? Diane appeared at my side, tablet in hand. Initial feedback? Positive, I confirmed. Very positive, but nothing final yet. She nodded, checking something on her screen. You should know. 3 more Rivercrest employees submitted applications this morning, all from the client services team. The exodus was accelerating. Soon, my father would be forced to acknowledge that Neil's appointment had triggered a talent drain Rivercrest couldn't afford. Process them through standard channels, I instructed. And Diane? Let's accelerate our public launch. If Peterson signs, I want to be ready to announce their partnership immediately, along with our full service offering. Are you sure? She asked, understanding the implications. That would burn bridges completely with Rivercrest, with your father. Some bridges need to be rebuilt from scratch, I replied, and some need to be left behind entirely. The moment felt pivotal, not just for Phoenix's business trajectory, but for my personal journey. I was no longer defining myself in opposition to my father's decisions, or in protest to Neil's appointment. I was building something entirely new, entirely mine, that would succeed or fail on its own merits. That evening, as I left the office, I noticed a delivery being unloaded at reception, a large wooden crate carefully wrapped in protective packaging. What's this? I asked Raj, who was supervising the delivery. Arrived just now, he explained, checking the shipping manifest. It's a conference table? From Analog Woodworks. But I didn't order any additional furniture. Curious, I examined the delivery note attached to the crate. The message, handwritten in familiar precise script, read simply, "For Phoenix's boardroom. Some traditions are worth preserving. Mom." Inside the crate was a handcrafted walnut conference table, smaller than Rivercrest's imposing boardroom centerpiece, but equally beautiful, with subtle modern touches that perfectly complemented Phoenix's aesthetic. My mother, who had always understood my complicated relationship with family legacy better than anyone, had found the perfect symbolic gift, acknowledging tradition while embracing evolution. Tomorrow it would take its place in our headquarters, bridging past and future in a way that felt right. Not a rejection of heritage, but a thoughtful reinterpretation of it, just like Phoenix itself. As the delivery team carefully maneuvered the table into our conference room, I received a text from Thomas Peterson. Board discussion scheduled for tomorrow morning. We'll call you directly afterward. Preparing for positive outcome. Another piece falling into place. Another step toward Phoenix's emergence as not just a competitor, but a market leader in its own right. I ran my hand along the smooth walnut surface of my mother's gift, feeling the grain beneath my fingertips. Solid, substantial, yet shaped into something new. The wood itself carried history, growth rings marking years of development, now transformed into something both functional and beautiful. It's perfect, I told Raj, who was overseeing the final positioning. Exactly what this space needed. He studied it thoughtfully. Balances the modern technology with something timeless. Smart design choice. My mother always did understand the importance of appropriate symbolism, I replied with a smile. As I prepared to leave, Eliza emerged from the development lab, her expression triumphant. We just completed the final security protocol tests. The system performed flawlessly, even against attacks that would cripple standard industry protections. In time for Peterson's technical review tomorrow? Completely documented and verified, she confirmed. They can send whatever security team they want. We're ready. One by one, the remaining team members departed, each reporting similar progress in their respective areas. Diane with finalized contract templates, Gerald with detailed client transition protocols, Raj with completed administrative infrastructure. Phoenix was no longer just a concept or a reaction. It had become a living, breathing entity, a creation that now existed independent of the circumstances that had sparked its formation. Standing alone in our headquarters that evening, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years at Rivercrest. Pure, uncomplicated pride. Not in surpassing my father's expectations or proving my worth to skeptical board members, but in building something genuinely valuable, something that reflected my own vision rather than someone else's legacy. Tomorrow, Peterson Global might become Phoenix's first major client. Other companies would likely follow. The industry would transform. Rivercrest would adapt or decline. But tonight, in the quiet of our newly furnished space, with my mother's symbolic gift waiting to witness whatever came next, what mattered most was simpler. I had found my own path forward. The table would remain long after the current business turbulence settled, a reminder that some traditions truly were worth preserving, but always on our own terms, always shaped to serve our future, rather than merely echo our past. 3 months. After Phoenix Automation's launch, I stood at the window of our expanded office space, watching new workstations being assembled for the 12 additional employees we'd hired to handle our growing client base. What had begun as an empty industrial loft now hummed with purpose and innovation, sleek glass partitions defining collaborative spaces, our development lab equipped with cutting-edge technology, and at the center of our conference room, my mother's walnut table that had witnessed every major decision since our founding. The Peterson Global contract, signed just 8 days after our initial presentation, had indeed created the industry ripple effect Thomas had predicted. 3. More major clients had followed their lead within the first month, with another 5 in final negotiations now. Our revenue projections, originally calculated for year-end, had been reached in just 14 weeks. Phoenix was no longer an upstart or a curiosity. We had become a legitimate market force. My phone buzzed with a text from Diane. Rivercrest. Quarterly results just released. Stock down 18%. Earnings call in 30 minutes. Conference room ready if you want to listen. I hesitated only briefly before replying. I'll be there. This would be Neil's first earnings call as CEO, a baptism by fire given the numbers. Part of me felt sympathy for my brother, thrust into leadership without adequate preparation or understanding. Another part recognized the inevitable consequences of my father's decision to prioritize family loyalty over business logic. In the conference room, Diane had already connected to the earnings call. Eliza joined us, along with Gerald, whose client relationships had proven even more valuable than anticipated. We listened in professional silence as Neil's voice, noticeably strained despite obvious attempts at confidence, detailed Rivercrest's transitional quarter and temporary setbacks due to system reconfiguration. The euphemisms couldn't disguise the reality reflected in the numbers. Revenue down 22%, operating margins compressed by nearly a third, client attrition accelerating beyond their initial projections. The analyst questions grew increasingly pointed as the call progressed. focusing particularly on Rivercrest's technology strategy and competitive response to Phoenix's emergence. My father joined for the Q&A portion, fielding the more technical questions Neil struggled with. His voice carried the controlled precision I knew so well, the tone he used when negotiating difficult situations, revealing nothing of the emotion surely simmering beneath the surface. When an analyst directly asked about client departures to Phoenix Automation, Vincent's response was clipped but revealing. We're focused on our core manufacturing business. Some clients have chosen to diversify their technology vendors, but Rivercrest's fundamental production capability remains unmatched in the industry. A partial truth that acknowledged reality while attempting to minimize the impact of Phoenix's emergence. Classic Vincent Parker messaging. When the call ended, I turned to my team. Thoughts? They're pivoting, Eliza observed. Trying to reframe Rivercrest as primarily a manufacturing company that happens to use technology rather than an integrated solution provider. Smart, given their circumstances, but it concedes the entire automation space to us. Gerald nodded agreement. They've lost 4 key accounts completely in addition to the partial transitions we've seen. The manufacturing-only strategy might stabilize them, but at significantly reduced margins. They've also slashed R&D budget by 40%, Diane added, reviewing the detailed financial statements. Short-term thinking that will hurt them long-term. And the new technology leadership? I asked, curious about who had taken over my former responsibilities. An outside hire from Meridian, Gerald supplied. Experienced but conventional. Unlikely to develop anything revolutionary enough to win back market share. I absorbed this analysis silently. Rivercrest was wounded but adapting, contracting to a smaller, more traditional version of itself. Not the innovative industry leader I'd helped build, but perhaps sustainable in its reduced form. The knowledge brought a complex mix of emotions. Vindication, certainly, but also a strange sadness for what might have been. Where do we stand on the Meridian proposal? I asked, deliberately shifting focus back to Phoenix's future. Diane pulled up the relevant documents on the display. Their acquisition offer has increased by 15% since last month, still structured as cash plus earnout, with guaranteed positions for the executive team. And your recommendation? I asked, though I already knew their perspective. Same as before, Eliza replied firmly. We're just scratching the surface of what Phoenix can become. An acquisition now would limit our potential and likely result in our technology being folded into Meridian's existing infrastructure rather than fully developed. I nodded agreement. Then we maintain our position. We're not for sale, but we're open to strategic partnership discussions that preserve our independence. As the team discussed our upcoming pitch to a potential international client, my phone lit up with an unexpected name, Neil. I excused myself, stepping into the hallway to take the call. Neil, this is unexpected. Samantha. My brother's voice sounded tired, older somehow. I suppose you heard the earnings call. I did. A lengthy silence followed before he spoke again. This isn't how I pictured my first quarter as CEO. The understatement almost made me laugh. Few things turn out exactly as we imagine them. Did you? He asked suddenly. Did you picture this? Phoenix taking off, Rivercrest struggling, Dad. He trailed off. Dad what? Neil sighed heavily. He's not well, Sam. The stress of everything, your departure, the client losses, the stock price. His doctor is concerned about his heart. The news struck harder than I'd expected. Despite everything, Vincent Parker was still my father. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, meaning it. He won't admit it, of course, Neil continued. Still working 16-hour days, refusing to delegate anything important. But I can see it taking a toll. He looks older. Much older than just 3 months ago. I could picture it easily. My father driving himself relentlessly, viewing Phoenix's success as a challenge to be overcome through sheer force of will. He had always responded to setbacks by working harder rather than reconsidering his approach. "Is he following medical advice?" I asked, genuine concern overriding our professional conflict. "Barely. You know how he is about doctors." Another heavy sigh. "But that's not why I called." "Why did you call, Neil?" "Would you—" He hesitated. "Would you consider meeting with us? Not a reconciliation necessarily, just a conversation. About coexistence, if nothing else." I considered the request carefully. 3 months ago, I might have suspected a trap, an attempt to manipulate me through family obligation. Now, hearing the genuine strain in Neil's voice, I recognized something different, the humility that comes with facing one's limitations. "When? Tomorrow? Neutral ground, not Rivercrest." The relief in his voice was palpable. "There's a lot we should discuss." After arranging details, I returned to the conference room, finding my team waiting expectantly. "Everything okay?" Diane asked, concern evident in her expression. "Neil wants to meet. Apparently my father's health is suffering." Understanding passed between us. Everyone in this room had worked with Vincent Parker for years, had witnessed his strengths and flaws firsthand. "Will you go?" Eliza asked. "Yes, but not to compromise Phoenix's position." I surveyed their faces, people who had taken significant risks to follow me into this new venture. Whatever happens with Rivercrest, with my family, Phoenix continues. On the path we've established. That's non-negotiable. Their collective relief was visible. They weren't just concerned about business implications, they cared about me, about how this ongoing family conflict affected me personally. That evening, I met my mother for dinner at her favorite restaurant, a tradition we'd established in the months since Phoenix's launch. Our relationship had strengthened through weekly conversations that ranged from business strategy to family, history to the personal challenges of building something new. "Neil called," I told her as we settled at our usual corner table. "Asked for a meeting tomorrow. Says Dad's health is declining." She nodded thoughtfully, her expression revealing little surprise. Vincent never did manage stress well, always internalized everything. "You don't seem shocked about the meeting request." "Not particularly." She sipped her wine elegantly. "Neil called me last week. I think he's finally understanding the impossible position Vincent put him in." This was unexpected. "Neil reached out to you? They've barely acknowledged your existence for 15 years. "Desperate times," she replied with a slight smile. "He had questions about the early days of Rivercrest, how Joseph, your grandfather, handled succession planning." "And what did you tell him?" "The truth. That Joseph recognized leadership potential based on demonstrated capability, not birth order or gender or family politics. That he would have chosen you without hesitation." The statement, matter of fact and without drama, carried the weight of both validation and loss. My grandfather, who had died when I was in college, had often told me I had the Parker business sense. I'd always believed he would have supported my advancement at Rivercrest. "Be prepared for your father to make this about loyalty rather than business," she advised, her voice gentle but knowing. "It's how he processes the world. Who's with him versus who's against him." I know. I'd seen this pattern my entire life. But this isn't about being against him. It never was. I understand that. Neil might be beginning to understand it too, your father. She paused thoughtfully. Vincent has always confused control with success. It's why our marriage failed, and it's why he couldn't see your independence as anything but betrayal. Her insight, as always, cut to the heart of the matter. "What would you do?" I asked, valuing her perspective in a way I hadn't always appreciated. "Listen," she said simply. "Then make decisions based on what's true now, not what hurt in the past. The next morning, I arrived at the suggested cafe 15 minutes early, selecting a corner table with a view of both the entrance and the street beyond. Old negotiation habits die hard. Neil arrived precisely on time, alone, my father nowhere in sight. "He's not coming, is he?" I asked as Neil settled across from me. "No." My brother's expression was apologetic but resigned. He agreed initially, then changed his mind this morning. Said he wouldn't beg his daughter for professional courtesy. Some things never changed. Yet you still came. I still came. Neil studied me with new awareness. Because I've learned some difficult lessons these past months about the company, about leadership, about what you actually built while I was. While you were what? While I was playing at business, he admitted with surprising candor. Attending industry events, networking with clients, but never really understanding the operational foundation that made everything possible. His honesty was unexpected. The Neil I'd known 3 months ago would never have acknowledged such limitations. 3 weeks ago, he continued, our automation system crashed completely. Took down the entire production scheduling framework for 48 hours. The replacement we'd purchased couldn't handle our volume, and the developers we'd retained after your team left couldn't resolve the conflicts in the underlying code structure. I winced involuntarily. System failures of that magnitude could cost millions in lost production and missed deliveries. That's when I truly understood what Dad had done, Neil said quietly. He'd handed me a title without ensuring I had the knowledge or resources to succeed. Set me up to fail while blaming you for abandoning ship. Leadership has a way of revealing our gaps, I observed, not unkindly. He nodded, the shadows under his eyes testament to sleepless nights I knew all too well from my early years at Rivercrest. I've been trying to keep everything from collapsing. The automation system replacements we purchased are inadequate. Key people keep leaving. Clients still call asking specifically for you. It was the validation I might once have craved, but now it brought little satisfaction, only confirmation of what I'd already known. What do you want from me, Neil? From Phoenix? Coexistence, he said simply. Some arrangement that allows both companies to survive. A licensing agreement for the automation system, perhaps. Shared clients where it makes sense. And Dad? Does he know you're proposing this? Neil's slight grimace was answer enough. He'll come around when he sees the business logic. Eventually. Perhaps. Or perhaps Vincent Parker would view any compromise as capitulation, any cooperation as weakness. But that was Neil's challenge to navigate now, not mine. I'll have our team review potential collaboration frameworks, I said finally. No promises, but we'll consider it. Relief washed over his features. Thank you, Sam. As we parted ways, outside the cafe, Neil hesitated, then asked the question that had likely been on his mind throughout our meeting. Do you regret it? Leaving? Starting Phoenix? I considered my answer carefully, knowing it mattered beyond mere politeness. I regret that it came to this, I said truthfully. That it took such a dramatic break for me to build something that's truly mine. But no, I don't regret Phoenix itself. Sometimes the only way forward is to start fresh. Neil nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. He should have made you CEO. The simple acknowledgement, spoken aloud for the first time, landed with surprising weight. Not because I still needed the validation, but because it represented growth on Neil's part that I hadn't thought possible. Maybe, I conceded. But then Phoenix wouldn't exist. And I've discovered I'd rather be a founder than an inheritor. Back at Phoenix headquarters, my executive team waited expectantly in the conference room, gathered around my mother's walnut table. Their concern was evident, though they tried to maintain professional composure. Neil wants to explore potential collaboration. I explained, detailing his proposal. Thinks Rivercrest might be open to licensing our system rather than continuing with their inadequate replacement. And your response? Gerald asked carefully. I told him we'd consider it, which we will, objectively, strategically, without emotion clouding our analysis. Diane was already typing notes. We'll prepare a framework model with various options, from limited licensing to full operational partnership. With appropriate safeguards, Eliza added. Any arrangement would need robust protection for our intellectual property and clear boundaries on implementation scope. Their immediate focus on practical considerations rather than past conflicts confirmed what I already knew. This team, this company, was built on something more substantial than reaction to Rivercrest. We had moved beyond the circumstances of our founding to establish an identity defined by innovation rather than opposition. That evening, as Phoenix's offices quieted, I found myself alone in the conference room, seated at my mother's table. The polished walnut surface reflected the soft evening light, highlighting the grain patterns that made each section unique, yet part of a cohesive whole. 3 months ago, I had left Rivercrest feeling betrayed, undervalued, and determined to prove my worth through competition. The anger had been real, the hurt genuine, the desire for vindication powerful. Now, with Phoenix thriving beyond even our optimistic projections, those initial motivations had been transformed into something more meaningful, not revenge or validation, but creation and possibility. We weren't just competing with Rivercrest. We were redefining what manufacturing automation could be, pushing boundaries my father had considered too risky to explore. My phone buzzed with a text message from my mother. How did it go with Neil? I typed back, better than expected. He's growing up. Dad's still refusing to engage. Her response came quickly. Vincent will hold out until the last possible moment. Always has. The question is whether you need his acknowledgement anymore. The question lingered as I gathered my things to leave. Did I still need my father's recognition? His approval? His admission that he had been wrong? 3 months ago, the answer would have been an unequivocal yes. Now I wasn't so certain. As I walked through Phoenix's workspace, I passed the wall where we displayed our core values, principles we had collectively defined during our first month of operation. Among them, in simple black lettering, we build rather than break, we create rather than criticize, we move forward rather than dwell in the past. Words that had become more than corporate platitudes. They represented the company we were becoming, one defined by its own vision rather than in opposition to someone else's. Walking to my car in the quiet evening, I found myself reflecting on the conversation with Neil, on my father's refusal to meet, on the journey that had brought me to this moment. The past 3 months had taught me more about leadership, about business, about myself than 12 years at Rivercrest ever had. I hadn't left Rivercrest simply because I was passed over for CEO. I'd left because staying would have meant accepting limitations on my vision, my potential, my fundamental understanding of what business should be. In building Phoenix, I hadn't just taken the automation system, the client relationships, or the talented team members who chose to follow me. I'd taken ownership of my future, reclaimed the right to create rather than merely inherit. And that, ultimately, was worth more than any title my father could have bestowed or withheld. The realization brought a sense of peace I hadn't expected, not because the hurt had disappeared or the injustice had been erased, but because those things no longer defined my path forward. Phoenix would continue to grow, to innovate, to challenge industry assumptions, whether or not Vincent Parker ever acknowledged its legitimacy or my leadership. As I drove home through the city streets, I passed Rivercrest's headquarters, still imposing in the evening light, my father's name still prominently displayed above the entrance. Once, that building had represented everything I aspired to lead. Now it seemed like a monument to a different era, a different approach to business, a different understanding of legacy. My phone rang through the car's speaker system. Thomas. Peterson calling, probably with updates on their expanded implementation timeline. Thomas, I answered. How's the new module performing? Exceeding projections by 22%, he replied, satisfaction evident in his voice. Which is why I'm calling. Our board has authorized me to discuss potential equity investment in Phoenix. We believe your technology represents the future of the industry, and we want to be part of that journey. The offer was significant. Validation from one of the industry's most respected companies, potential capital for accelerated growth, strategic partnership with a global leader. I'm interested in hearing more, I replied, already thinking through implications and possibilities. Let's set up a meeting next week with our respective teams. After ending the call, I found myself smiling at the timing. This opportunity, arriving just hours after Neil's request for collaboration. The contrast couldn't have been clearer. Rivercrest looking backward, seeking to recapture what they had lost, while Peterson Global looked forward, investing in what Phoenix was becoming. The choice before me wasn't whether to help Rivercrest survive or to pursue Phoenix's independent future. It was whether Phoenix's path forward might include bringing Rivercrest along, not out of obligation or sentiment, but because selective collaboration could create value for both companies. That decision would be made based on business logic, rather than family dynamics. And the fact that I could consider it dispassionately, without either reflexive rejection or emotional attachment, represented perhaps the most important thing I had gained since leaving Rivercrest. Not just independence, not just success, but wisdom.